Emergency responders are a really special group of people. Firemen run into burning buildings. Policemen can get called into bank robberies. Paramedics can get coughed on and... Aw, come on, I kid the paramedics. Paramedics work hard and can also get called into some crazy situations, like the one in tonight's scary story.
A Paramedic's Tale of Demonic Possession. Submitted by Josh H. Let me begin by giving you a little backstory to this particular situation. It was a humid summer night in June of 2008 or 2009, around 2 a.m. I'm a paramedic in a very, very rural area. We have a population of about 22,000. That covers about 500 square miles. The service I work for covered all 911 calls during this time. I'd been a paramedic for about 2 years. Prior to that, I had been an EMT for 3. The majority of the calls we received were either shortness of breath, due to 50% of the community being retired coal mine workers with some form of COPD or emphysema, and the rest being drug-seeking individuals with the occasional shooting, stabbing, or car accident. That particular night, I was dispatched to a call of a female patient who was hearing voices and seeing things that weren't there, according to her spouse. Around this time is when bath salts and all that synthetic medication stuff exploded, and people were overdosing quite frequently. In my mind, I knew this was what was going on before I even left my station. Looking back now, though, I honestly wish it was just that. When I was given the address, I was kinda shocked. It wasn't in the usual slums that we pick up overdoses. It was in a part of the county that was known to have very nice homes of the working class people. Upon arriving to this person's home, it reassured my thought. The place was a well-kept 2-story brick house. When I knocked on the door and announced my usual greeting, "EMS, did someone call for an ambulance?" I was met by a 40-ish-year-old man. I did not need to ask where the patient was. Across from the room sat a female around the same age, just staring at us with an empty glare. It sent chills down my spine, and the look on my partner's face, it told me he must have felt the same. The type of stare I've never witnessed again, just empty. I introduced myself and my partner and asked her name. Her eyes moved from my partner and looked me dead in the face, and with the voice that should not have come from a 130-pound female, she said,
"You are too late, Joshua. They are already here."
The voice gave me goosebumps. I shook it off and I asked her who was here. She was still staring me directly in the eyes and had not blinked once, and she said,
"Don't you feel us around you?"
At that time, I had already decided I wanted to get the heck out of this house. All I felt was heaviness in that house. It filled me with unease. She had no medical history or took any medications according to her husband, and she was a very healthy-looking individual. Things just didn't add up. I refrained from asking any questions and just walked her outside as quickly as possible towards my ambulance. During this time, she's muttering to herself and whipping her head from side to side as if someone were speaking into her ears. I'm not a religious person at all, but this made me wonder if I was the right person to be taking care of this patient and not a priest. I loaded her into the ambulance and began my normal assessment. She hadn't looked at me, but she was just shifting her eyes left and right, never looking at anything for more than 2 seconds. I took her vital signs, I applied a cardiac monitor, and I told her I intended on starting an IV on her. She suddenly stared at me once again and smiled with a malicious grin. Then she said,
"Do what you please, boy."
I've never felt in my life so weirded out by such a small woman. It was like looking into the eyes of evil itself. After starting the IV, I sat behind her and I began the 10-minute transport to the hospital. All the while, I couldn't wait to get this thing out of my ambulance. All of a sudden, 5 minutes into the transport, she began chuckling in a low, deep voice, that turned my blood cold. I moved back over in front of her and asked if everything was okay. I was met with that same malicious grin and silence. She wouldn't speak, and didn't for the remainder of the trip. About 2 minutes out, I called the local ER and informed them I was coming with a very unique patient. I personally knew all the nurses and physicians from working years alongside them. They laughed me off until they saw her with their own 2 eyes. She wouldn't speak, just grin and stare. They placed her on the same equipment I had put her on and returned to the nurse's station. I began to explain what had happened. They all got a good laugh at my expense as they could tell I was visually shaken. So I just told them, if you don't believe in evil, she will change your mind. At that time, the monitor they placed on her that can be seen at the nursing station alarmed. Her respirations were 40 times a minute. Her nurse, who was a very good friend of mine, walked into the doorway of her room and just gasped and placed her hand over her mouth. She was petrified. Of course, curiosity got the best of me, and I went over to examine her myself. How I wish I would have just stopped there, just dropped her off then and ran back to the station. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. She was only touching the bed with the tips of her toes and the back of her head. The entire body was in an arch, arms laid flat beside her, and her eyes locked on the 2 of us. She was panting in a way that sounded like a growl. We called the doctor into the room, and we just said, "Oh my God." He ordered her a very powerful sedative called Versed, which is what they give you right before you have a surgery. 2 milligrams is plenty enough to put a decent-sized man to sleep for a while. She remained in this position for at least 5 minutes, but it seemed a lot longer. Her eyes were dark and empty. Her voice was otherworldly. My blood again turned to ice. She didn't fight at all when they administered the medication. 20 seconds later, she was asleep, or so we thought. The doctor ordered a full head CT and blood work. I was pulled into her room by the nurses just in case she became violent or worse. I reached out for her arm to place a tourniquet to help draw lab work. As soon as I touched her skin though, her eyes peeled back open. She stared at me with that same empty look as the nurse went to get another dose of Versed. 2 more milligrams and she was still staring into my soul. I broke eye contact in hopes she would just go to sleep, but it never happened. The amount of medication could tranquilize anyone. We drew labs without an incident, all while hoping she would test positive for something. Her lab work came back as well as her CT. Everything was negative. Nothing was out of the ordinary in the slightest way. She hadn't even taken a Tylenol. While we were discussing with the doctor what they would do next, the silence of this small town ER was broken by a blood-curdling scream, followed by words in a deep, raspy voice that I will never forget.
"I am Legion."
Then silence. By then, I had had enough. I returned to the station. I called the ER back about an hour later to see if anything else had happened. She was transferred to a psychiatric unit about 2 hours away. I never cared to check up on her, and have no desire to this day. I pass that same home from time to time, and it sends shivers down my spine. This has become somewhat of a legend around the hospital. No one truly believes everything that happened. For the 7 people who did witness what happened, there is no doubt something otherworldly was there. Just writing and recalling that night filled me with chills. It is one night I will never forget. That was the only time I looked at pure evil, and I hope it is the last. I'm 29 years old now and still work as a paramedic, and every time I get a call of someone hearing voices, I can't help but think about her.
That was creepy! After seeing something like that, I like to have a good laugh with an episode of The Slasher Family. It's a sitcom starring your favorite horror icons. Wow! That looks awesome! Who makes this show? Oh yeah, me! New episodes come out on Fridays. Now, what if you hate to laugh? You should subscribe anyway. It's free. Just do it. No, I've got you covered too, with true scary stories, creepypasta, urban legends, and 2-sentence horror stories. They're like little horror vitamins. So come on over and subscribe. You'd think that'd be a once-in-a-lifetime experience, but later on that month, our paramedic partner got called to a house of a woman convinced she went to hell and met the devil. When the paramedics got there, they found the woman covered in third-degree burns and immediately brought her to the ER. Before leaving, the paramedics told the doctor they hope she turns out okay. The doctor took a good look at her and said, "I'm sure she'll be fine. She's already well done."